This week on Jerusalem Dateline, 5 years of Syrian Civil War and no end in sight. And the Yazidis, brutally attacked by ISIS, yet no one knows who they are. Plus, what it's like to live on the biblical Mount of Olives. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. We're coming to you from the Mount of Olives with the old and new city of Jerusalem behind me. It's an important biblical site, but it also figures prominently in the battle over Jerusalem. Later in our program, we'll tell you more about what it's like for a Jewish family to resettle here. But first, this summer marks the 5th anniversary of the Syrian Civil War. It started as a protest against the Assad government, but as Chris Mitchell reports, it divided the country and its impact was felt from the Middle East to the United States.
This drone footage of the Syrian city of Homs reveals the apocalyptic landscapes the Syrian Civil War has created. Barely 5 years ago, Homs was once a thriving city, but now, like much of Syria today, it's either a wasteland or a battlefield. Recently, we talked with Jonathan Spire, Middle East analyst and journalist who reported from the front lines of the conflict, and in a recent article reflected on the human cost of the war.
I kind of wanted to take a step back and just really focus on that, on just the extent to which, human beings inside Syria, on all sides, have suffered in the course of this war. Nearly 10 million people made homeless, almost half the population, or pre-war population of Syria having left their homes, maybe 400,000 people dead. The sheer magnitude of what's happening in Syria, is something that I think needs to get across.
While the world's media focused on the war at one time, much of their attention has turned elsewhere. Yet the brutal war goes on and on.
I think it's important to remember is that this war, is nowhere close to finishing. We had, of course, the ceasefire coming in this year on February 27th. It held for a while, but it's now, conclusively broken down and fighting's taking place across the country once again.
The conflict produced a wave of refugees that is changing the face of Europe.
And that's causing enormous strain on European societies who are not necessarily well prepared to receive those newcomers or who don't wish to receive those newcomers.
Spire believes the war is a wake-up call to the U.S.
Syria, I think, is kind of an example of what happens when America is not involved close on the ground, when America isn't kind of around with its allies to keep some semblance of order, to keep that security architecture in the region, to deter enemies, to make sure the bad guys stay out. Then what you get things like the Syrian Civil War.
He also believes the war helped give birth to ISIS.
Absolutely. Without the vacuum that opened up as a result of the Syrian Civil War, it's very hard to imagine how that Islamic State in Iraq, that became the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, could have got itself back on its feet.
The war also provided an historic opportunity for Russian President Vladimir Putin to dramatically increase Russia's presence in the Middle East. As the war drags on with no end in sight, its impact will likely still be felt, not only in the region, but beyond as well. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
The Yazidi people have been brutally attacked by ISIS, and most of the world doesn't know anything about them. But one woman has stood up for them. She's the only Yazidi member of the parliament in Iraq, and she has risked her life for her fellow Yazidis. Gary Lane brings us her amazing story.
The world took notice after lawmaker Vian Dakil's impassioned plea to save fellow Yazidis trapped on Iraq's Sinjar mountain.
Our families have been slaughtered. Set aside your political differences. In the name of humanity, I call upon all of you to save us. To save us.
It was August 2014. Islamic State fighters overran Yazidi villages around Sinjar and Zumar near the Mosul Dam. Men were slaughtered, women and children kidnapped. The jihadists forced boys to join ISIS, while girls were raped, bought, and sold for sex. The United States responded to Dakil's cry of desperation, airlifting supplies to Sinjar Mountain. Help was delivered to as many as 10,000 Yazidis who had fled ISIS. As her people died from thirst and hunger, Dakil traveled to Sinjar to personally deliver food and water. When she left the mountain, many Yazidis frantically boarded her departing helicopter. Dangerously overweight, the helicopter crashed.
Were you hurt? Were you injured badly?
Yeah.
What happened?
My legs, it's broken completely, and my rib and head and shoulders.
Dakil is healed now and doing well. Was risking her life and suffering personal injury worth it?
Yes, of course. Yes. Those my people, those, in general, those are human beings. And some terrorists come and kill them.
And Christians, including CBN, were among the first providing relief.
The Christian groups or Christian community, it's helped the Yazidi people. Yeah, it's helped them.
And now, 2 years later, as world attention focuses on immigration, Dakil is renewing her call for assistance. She says the Yazidis still need help rebuilding their lives and cities in Iraq.
We need someone to pray for the Yazidi people, and another to help them, and another to focus for the situation of those Yazidi. Because sometimes the people forget what happened.
Forgetting that 400,000 Yazidis still live in tents as refugees, often enduring harsh weather conditions.
Still, we have 1,000 boys between 6 to 10 years are captured in the special place in the Mosul. Wash the brain of them and teaching them to use the weapon, a new generation for terrorists, for ISIS.
And ISIS still holds 3,500 Yazidi females captive. Dakil says fortunately 2,000 girls and children have escaped.
But they need a psychological therapy. This is the situation now, after 2 years, and nobody cares.
Hoping to raise awareness and help, Dakil's sister Dilan started the Sinjar Foundation. A medical doctor, she has treated Yazidi girls who either escaped or were rescued from ISIS. Dilan told us about a 16-year-old girl who was raped several times after one jihadist traded her to another for a cigarette.
I also have the mother who told me about her own 9-year-old girls who have been raped in front of her eyes that bleeded to death. We are hearing terrible stories every day.
Many of the girls have suffered physical abuse and torture. Dilan says their emotional scars could last a lifetime.
Actually, they are releasing from hell to another hell, to come to live in a community, in a tent, in refugee camps, and most of their family members have been either kidnapped or killed in front of their eyes.
She says the Yazidi girls and their families need therapy. She wants American psychologists specializing in trauma to teach Iraqis how to help them. Dilan says she too may need counseling.
These stories will stay with me for the whole of my life. I spent many nights that I couldn't sleep, and I've cried till the morning. To be honest, I'm traumatized as well.
Do you think that's a good idea for us to pray for these girls, or what?
Of course, it would be great. They are emotionally effective. Anything would help them. Of course, praying, it will be a great thing to do.
Voices for a voiceless people. 2 sisters requesting prayer and help for the Yazidis, an ethnic religious people the world now says are victims of ISIS genocide. Gary Lane, CBN News, Erbil, Iraq.
Up next, living on the mountain of history in turbulent times. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. The Mount of Olives is an important biblical site, but it's also part of the disputed area known as East Jerusalem. CBN's Scott Ross visited a Jewish family living not far from here in a sea of Arabs. Some might call him a settler, but he says he's just resettling the mountain of history.
The Bible mentions the Mount of Olives many times in both the Old and New Testaments. It's the place where Christ will land when he returns to conquer Jerusalem.
What are we surrounded by?
Well, it's easy to understand that geographically because we are looking at the southeast corner of the old city of Jerusalem.
Right. I visited Ishai Fleischer and his family who live in Ma'ale Hazatim, here on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. Some call him a settler and say his community is a stumbling block to peace. But he says Jews have been here for thousands of years, and he's not going to be bullied out of it.
Those are the walls that were rebuilt by Sultan the Magnificent, but those are built upon the ancient city walls of Jerusalem. We see the Temple Mount, where we know the two temples stood, and where Abraham almost sacrificed his son Isaac at the binding. And if we look a little more to the east, we see the magnificent Mount of Olives Cemetery, which has 180,000 Jewish graves. I call it the Mountain of History. It's got important Jews, our people's ancestral burial ground from 3,000 years ago.
And this ancient piece of Jewish history is located in the eastern part of the city, which many refer to as East Jerusalem.
These were lands that were actually taken away from Israel in 1948 by the Jordanian army, which was British-led and British-trained and British-armed. And in 1967, we liberated or captured these lands and returned back to places like this. And that's why it's always so funny to me when people claim that we don't have a right to be here, that we're on somebody else's land. I just point them to this mountain and say, well, look at it. It speaks for itself. You know, this is where our people have been for the last 3,000 years.
Fleischer says Jewish people purchased the land in the 1700s to expand the cemetery. The expansion didn't happen. Now, 100 Jewish families live in the secured complex of Ma'ale Hazatim, built on that land. Children play within the compound in the mostly Arab neighborhood.
We live with Arab neighbors. These folks are all Arabs, Muslims, few Christians, but mostly Muslims. Some of them believing in the jihadist ideology that we don't have any rights here.
This next door neighbor is an Arab. There's an Arab. Are there contentions among you? How do you live with peace?
Instead of the word peace, I prefer a word called normalization. Okay? We are trying very hard to normalize our existence back here. We see ourselves as the indigenous returnees.
Fleischer says the compound, or those that live there, face weekly attacks, yet they hold on.
How many children have you?
I have two.
And you're raising them in this environment.
People say, you know, aren't you putting them in danger? And the first thing is to remember is that being a Jew is a dangerous occupation, always has been. And second thing, we're teaching them to be courageous in the face of bullies, which is a Jewish tradition, David versus Goliath tradition.
Right.
And that is not to let people push you around and not to let people erase your story and try to tell you that you don't belong in Jerusalem. I mean, there's no greater irony than to tell Jews that they don't belong in Jerusalem.
What would happen if Jerusalem were divided?
It's the progressive people who claim that it's a good idea to divide Jerusalem, and yet, what are you saying? Are you saying that we should take a city, build a wall down the middle, and divide it based on race and ethnicity, and move Arabs to one side and Jews to the other side? I mean, that's a vision of progress, to racially divide a city and build a scar-like wall down the middle of it? It's so regressive. We stand against dividing the city and dividing this land.
You would take exception to the word or the definition of yourselves as being settlers.
We are not settlers. We are resettlers. We are reclaiming our ancestral rights. And to create a narrative that we don't belong and that somehow we're foreigners in this land is a myth that's been created in order to delegitimize the Jewish people's right to this land.
How do you view the philosophy of land for peace?
It's actually a misunderstanding about the Middle East mindset. When you say, I'm willing to give my land for peace, what the Middle Easterner will hear is, here's my wife, take her, just don't hurt me. So when you say land for peace, you're actually giving up the most coveted thing here in the region, which is your land. And it just shows you to be a completely spineless, jelly-like creature, which with time will be destroyed. Every place that we leave, and that we abandon, and that we shrink away from, becomes our cancer. If it's South Lebanon, it becomes the home of Hezbollah. If it's Gaza, it becomes the home of ceaseless Hamas wars. 3 wars in 6 years. To make it in the Middle East, you have to be big, you have to be tough, you have to be a regional superpower. The message of Israel is one of tremendous opportunity for a better life.
How do we pray for you here? We're in the middle of it here.
One of the ways to pray for Jerusalem is to come here and go to the wall and go to the Temple Mount and talk to God and thank Him for the opportunity. Be part of the story in some way. We have to take it also from the realm of prayer and the realm of hope to the realm of action. And one example is that the United States of America does not recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. In fact, they don't even recognize Jerusalem as a city in Israel. Tell your countries, put your embassies in Jerusalem. What kind of disrespect is that to Jerusalem and to Israel and to the God of Israel and to the God of the Bible, that you don't even recognize Jerusalem as the renewed, reconstituted capital of the Jewish Commonwealth that we've all prayed and yearned for, the promises of the Bible.
Scott Ross, Mount of Olives, Jerusalem.
Up next, what is prophecy and how does it relate to Jerusalem? Welcome back. What is prophecy and how does it relate to Israel and Jerusalem? CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell spoke to author and Middle East expert Joel Richardson about prophecy in the Holy City.
Joel, it's great to be with you here, especially here in Jerusalem with such a great background.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you, Chris.
Joel, we're talking about prophecy. If people need to know the basics, what basically is prophecy?
Well, essentially, as the scriptures say, prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. And what I take that to mean is that prophecy are the words that God spoke through the biblical prophets as he was really just reiterating and laying out his plan to redeem not just Israel, but to redeem all of creation. Prophecy is simply the story about how God is redeeming everything through his son Jesus.
And so from a Christian or biblical point of view, what are the signs of the times right now?
When we look at the contours of the landscape as it was described by the biblical prophets, it's clearly coming into focus. It's not completely there yet, but there are definite clear signs that are coming into focus. And so personally I believe that the emergence of, for instance, Turkey as a radical leading nation in the Middle East. This is a profound sign because whether it be in Daniel 8 or 11, Ezekiel 38, 39, there's a tremendous emphasis placed on the region of Turkey, Asia Minor, in biblical prophecy. And it speaks of them as having a prominent role in the last days. So, but of course, you know, the biggest one is simply right here. We look at Israel. I mean, the fact that the prophets declared beforehand that the Jewish people would repatriate this land before his return. I mean, this is one of the clearest miracles and proofs of God that we have.
And we're also standing right here in Jerusalem. So what role does Jerusalem play in prophecy?
So it's a beautiful city with incredible history and ethnic and religious diversity. But it's just a very natural city. You know, you've got ethnic tensions, you've got a lot of tour buses, you know, you've just got a very natural city. But according to the Bible, the God of creation has declared that this is the very spot whereby he is going to govern the universe from. This will literally be the throne of God.
Would you say in some ways that the Bible is a Jerusalem-centric book?
The Bible was not primarily written for Americans or about Americans. It's primarily about this piece of land. Why? Because this is the spot that Jesus is going to rule from. And as a result of that, Satan has been very active in surrounding the throne of David. He's been surrounding this city and this nation with a people and a doctrine which is fundamentally opposed to the redemption that Messiah is going to bring.
So we see the Mount of Olives in the background here, Joel. What does the Mount of Olives have to do with biblical prophecy?
Well, I mean, first of all, Jesus gave his final sermon on the end times from the Mount of Olives. That's why we call it the Olivet Discourse. But the scriptures are also clear. It says that when Messiah returns, at some point in the process, his feet will actually land on the Mount of Olives. And then it says it will actually split in two. And, again, that's why I say we look at the city with our eyes, our natural eyes. It's hard to visualize what's going to take place. There's going to be transformation of topography. This is the global capital of the rule of the Son of God, and this is where the primary battles are going to unfold.
Yeah. Well, amazing. Great to talk to you, Joel.
Amen, Chris. Great to be with you.
Coming up, how Christians are providing practical help for Israeli terror victims. Welcome back. For nearly a year, Israelis have suffered from a wave of terror attacks. Emergency response is key to keeping the casualties low, and having enough ambulances is part of that. As Chris Mitchell reports, one Christian organization is providing the tools for first responders.
Getting to the scene of a terror attack quickly is critical to save lives. That's why Jesus Ministries donated 3 new ambulances to Israel's first responders, Magen David Adom. And this is a practical way of showing support?
That I believe is, because in my little survey that I did, in one way we can help the poor is by the need for blood donation and medical supplies.
The ambulances will make a difference beyond fighting terrorism.
Each one of these vehicles is providing services to hundreds and thousands of people every year. And by that we can deliver babies safely en route to the hospitals. We can resuscitate elderly people. We can support people with disabilities and then evacuate them under very good medical conditions and supervision to the hospitals.
The gifts demonstrate the growing relationship between Christians and Jews.
The ambulances are an important part of showing to the Israeli people the Christian support and love for Israel. This is one of the most important aspects of the ambulances. It shows to the Israeli people who often feel very alone that we are not alone, that God has brought these Christian people to support us and to lift us up. And this does that.
We're an isolated people. We're vilified, we're castigated, we're ostracized in so many corners of the earth. At the same time, once you can lift the manhole of the secret chambers, there are millions and millions that are supportive and love the Jewish people. Our job is to open those doors, to prize them open, to keep them open, and to make sure that the Jewish-Christian relationship is a continuing beautiful flower that blossoms and blooms for all the whole wide world to see.
One ambulance driver wanted to pass along a message to the Christians.
He said, tell them that each time I go out on a call, I feel that all of them are with me. And I have the energy to save a person's life and to provide health and safety to the people that I'm called to serve.
In the end times, Israel is going to be left all alone, as we read from the Holy Scriptures. And the only people who are going to stand with them, as it was in the past, will be the Christians.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
That's it for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And remember, the God who's watching over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.